Police officers of Reddit. Who's the smartest criminal you've ever encountered? A friend of my brother moved to Israel where for a period of time it was acceptable to drive with an American driver's license. He was pulled over for speeding, and when asked for his license, gave the officer his Costco card. Costco is a membership-based retail warehouse in the US and a few other countries. The exchange apparently went something like this. Officer, Costco? What is Costco? Friend, it's the state I'm from. Officer, that sounds made up. Friend, there are lots of states you probably haven't heard of. Have you heard of Arkansas? How about Idaho? Officer, I guess not. Friend, well I'm from the small state of Costco. The officer didn't have a response and wound up writing the ticket to someone with a Costco driver's license. Friend framed the ticket and still has it hanging on his wall. Reminds me of a family friend of mine. Very funny Australian with an absolutely horrendous bogan accent. Well, late 80s he's driving through Texas and runs a red light and is immediately pulled over by a 250-pound Texan police officer with an equally horrendous accent. The way the stories goes, this man is obviously not the brightest chapter. So our friend, when asked about running the red light, gets very apologetic and explains that he gets easily confused because in Australia you know how things are, either down there red means go and green means stop. The cop actually let this man go with a warning. I did not know that. Well, in America, red means stop, so don't make this mistake again. Well, there was this one guy, we'll call him Jack. Now, Jack stole stuff but also involved a lot of people. One time, he was planning to steal a whole bunch of cars, all luxury cars. So what he did was he got his people to call 911, etc. from all different places and countries to tell them that car theft was taking place in multiple places. Oh, he also only used a few people each time, so it was different voices, people, locations, etc. So the police went each time until he actually did the crime. Then no one came. He was never caught. When the owner of those cars came, the police didn't believe him. 10/10 genius right there. The story goes like this. A homeowner walks out one morning to drive to work only to find his car missing. He reports the car stolen to police. A few days later, his car is sitting back in front of his house. When he gets inside he finds a note. It was an apology that said the thief was in dire need of quick transportation and so he borrowed the first car he found with the keys inside. The writer noticed the sticker on the car for the local sports team, and just so there were no hard feelings, he left 4 tickets to an upcoming game in the glove box for the homeowner and his family. So the homeowner and his family attend the game, but when they return home they find the house has been ransacked and all items of value are gone. There was a guy with over 50 speeding charges, with the name Pro Jazdy. He was in a different car, with a different disguise every single time. Eventually, after the government set up a special task force to take down this guy, they realized that Pro Jazdy means driver's license in Polish. Clarification: it was 50 different people. The police just wrote down their name as Pro Jazdy every time someone with a Polish driver's license was caught speeding. Most of them are really stupid, so this guy isn't a criminal mastermind, but here goes. He wanted to rob a jeweler's on our city's main street, so he found out the flat beside the jeweler's was empty and he hid there. For 2 weeks he triggered the alarm on purpose several times a night. Massive headache for the police and the business. We turned up to see nothing there, nothing on cameras. Thought it was just a fluke, so the jewelers turned off the alarm system and said they'd wait until the morning to get a new one installed or that one rewired because something wasn't right. As soon as he heard that and the police leaving, he tore down the wall. Had already been working on this apparently, and robbed the place taking his sweet time. Escaped without anyone noticing anything for hours, until the jewelers came back in the morning. Then he tried to resell something he stole which had a serial number on it and got caught. So not that smart after all. Good effort though. Guy I went to high school with kept selling this gold necklace under a fake ID to jewelry stores. When he had cash in his hand from the sale, he'd flash a real looking airsoft gun and demand the necklace back. Worked about twice until the third guy knew what the deal was if someone tried selling this one particular necklace. Shop owner went in the back to reference an appraisal book and just called the cops. Funny part was he got like a year for the robberies, but using the fake gun added 5 years to the sentence. There's a small tourist town where I grew up that is divided in half by a big river. The only way between the two sides is over a long bridge, unless you go all the way around another mountain pass. These guys called in, like, 2-3 bomb threats to a posh hotel on one side of the bridge. I think they even left some dummy packages. All the police went across the bridge to do crowd control, etc, etc. The guys then called in a bomb threat on the bridge and started robbing stuff on the other side. The police couldn't be positive the bomb threat was real or not and hesitated long enough to give the thieves a head start. I first heard this story about 10 years ago, in Banff, Alberta. Never bothered to look up what was real versus what is invented. I think this is pretty close, but as my father used to say, you can't let truth get in the way of a good story. Here's one. I knew this guy back in the early 80s. Let's call him Jim. Well, he really wanted this high-powered superbike, but he knew he couldn't ever afford it. So what he did was to take drive to London and scout it about for a few days until he found that particular model parked outside a house. He goes back that night with a Slidder hammer, pulls the lock, and steals the bike. He gets it home, puts it in his garage and completely strips it so that the only thing left is the frame and the bottom half of the engine, which he drags into the weeds at the bottom of his garden. Then he pours fuel over it and burns it a bit. A few weeks pass and weeds have started growing over it. It's at that point he calls the cops and reports that someone had dumped a bike frame in his garden. The cops show up and he explains that he just got back from being away and found it. The cops take the frame and note down his name and address. A few days later, the cops call him and say that the bike had been stolen from London a month or so ago, from the serial number on the bottom half of the engine and frame, and that the insurance company had classed the bike as a write-off, and had told the cops to dispose of it. Now, because the frame was found in his garden and the insurance company didn't want it, the cops were duty-bound to ask him if he wanted to keep it, or if they should throw it. So he tells them that he'd always wanted to build a bike. He gets the frame back from them, repaints it, then puts it all back together and re-registers it as a Q-Reg, stolen and recovered. Working in a home improvement store when younger, this guy came in, went to the snowblowers, took one and went to the return desk, said he wanted to return it but had no receipt. They told him you need a receipt, so he says okay, I'll be back, and wheels it off to car through the front door. He did this a few times apparently. Couple places even helped him load it back into his car. Had a guy try that with the big expensive bedding sets at Sears back 20 years ago. He came up the escalator empty-handed, walked into the first aisle, and came out carrying the set. He said he wanted to return it. I said I needed a receipt, and when he asked why, I explained, well, sometimes we have issues with people coming up here, taking stuff off the shelves and trying to return it. He got a bit squilly, looked around kinda panicked and left with it. On the way to the door, security started following him, so he threw it at them and sprinted out the door. Obligatory, not a cop, but close on 20 years ago now, a guy on Australia's Gold Coast got away with a bank robbery in broad daylight. He cased the bank for a while and discovered a pattern of the bank manager arriving about 30 minutes before anyone else each morning, where he would leave the front doors unlocked so staff could help themselves in without a key or needing to wait for the boss to come and let them in. One morning the crook dressed himself up for a busy day of office work and waited for the bank manager to arrive. As the manager was unlocking the doors, he made his move, entering the building and threatening the manager with a gun. He got all the details he'd need to access the vault and so forth, and then tied the manager up and stuffed him in his office. When the staff arrived, he told them that the manager had called in sick and that regional office had sent him in to do the open shop thing, and no one batted an eyelid. This bank had a small walk-in vault that normally only held about 30-50k on any given day, but old mate had timed his robbery for the morning after business banking day, when all the local small businesses would make their end of week deposits, and reportedly got a score of close to 250k. Once the vault was open, he pulled his gun out and invited all the staff to enter the vault and lock them in. By this stage the bank was due to be opened, so when he went to leave there were a number of customers waiting to get inside to do their banking. He told them all that there had been an issue with the computers and that the tech team had estimated it would take about 30 minutes before the issue would be resolved, and that they couldn't open until then. Then he got into his car and drove straight to the airport and flew to Hong Kong and then disappeared. To my knowledge, the cops never caught him and never managed to find the money. They knew he'd have had to leave most of it in Australia somewhere because you can only take 10k or ding cash in any currency out of the country before customs pulls you into their interview rooms, so the assumption was that he had to have an accomplice here who would funnel the money to him slowly over time. Edit. For those wondering, he was identified later after witness statement and CCTV led to his getaway car being discovered at the airport where he boarded a plane destined for Hong Kong, which is as far as they could track him. Homeless guy in my hometown figured out if he committed some act of petty theft he'd get a night in jail, a warm place to sleep and a hot meal. He'd show up, turn in his stolen goods, and that would be that. After a while the police would just tell him to take back whatever he stole the next day. Quite the town character. A French thief who spent 10 years in prison became a comedian when he got out. One of his stories: finds a building, goes in, chooses a floor and transforms the exit door into an extra apartment, puts the apartment number, fake lock, welcome rug, etc., puts an iPhone for sale. The person comes to buy it. He opens the door in a shower robe and says, "Give me 1 second. I'm just gonna count the money," and poof, he's gone from the exit stairs. Not a police officer, but was an RA in college. My university owned all the houses adjacent to campus. These were unlike dorms, with RAs and the same rules, which included a very strict no alcohol policy. It was a privilege to live in the houses, and priority was given to upperclassmen who were more likely to bend that rule because they were of age and it was harder to police off campus in houses. There was a student who went around knocking on doors saying something like, "I'm an RA and housing director's name sent me for health and wellness checks." She'd find their booze, take it, and follow up with how she's doing them a favor by just giving them a warning. She wasn't actually an RA and was just keeping the booze for herself. The only reason she got found out was because she did it to an actual RA. The RA was male. They kept men and women housing separate, and just assumed he didn't know her because of that. It was only later he questioned why they had a female doing wellness checks on male housing. They did an investigation and asked other residents. Incidents dated back previous 2 years. Never found out who it was. Probably someone who committed a crime I never solved. With that being said, I had a guy use a sledgehammer to smash his way through a wall at a Best Buy and steal a bunch of phones and cameras. He was smart enough to wear gloves and a face mask and not touch anything he didn't have to. Alarms didn't go off until he exited out the back door, which the alarm company gets after a minute or two and takes them like 3-4 minutes to call into us, giving him a good 5-minute head start, so he was probably a few miles away before we got dispatched to it. He clearly scoped out the area before doing his deed too. Smart dude. A guy, let's call him Dave, I worked with told this story. He was working at a Mercedes dealership. He was sitting at his desk when this well-dressed gentleman comes in and asks if he could test drive a specific car that was parked out front. It was also a busy day. Usually they are allowed to let people test drive by themselves after they have taken some form of a deposit or something. Maybe the official ID or something. Not really relevant. So Dave gives out the keys. The guy goes on his test drive and comes back a reasonable amount of time later. He walks in and hands off the key, gets his deposit whatever back. This was about closing time, even possibly on a Friday. Everything is in order. Fast forward to the next business day. Dave's boss walks in and realizes that one of the Mercedes out front is gone. Dave has to explain that the car was returned and that they have the key and everything. Turns out the criminal didn't test drive. He drove somewhere to create a replica of the key and gave that replica back to the desk. He kept the real key. That smart son of a bee. Not a policeman here, but I have a nice story from insurance debt collectors. There was this guy who was already in heaps of debt, like more than a lifetime's worth of debt. He proceeded to file several police reports for identity theft up to the point that he got protected from financial checkups. It was a temporary measure that were given to repeated identity theft victims. At the same time, he had reported fake income to the IRS for the last couple of years to between 40 to 60 millions depending on the year. So when he applied for credit cards and loans, they were unable to check his financial credit due to the identity theft protection. But they checked his tax returns, which showed he had a massive income, got his loans and credit cards, emptied them out and left the country. This was in the late 90s early zeros. A guy in my dorm came to school solely to deal dogs. He took out student loans, registered for a bunch of 300-person freshman survey courses where he would never be missed, then literally never went to class. All he did was go to raves and concerts and keggers and sell party dogs. After the first semester, he was suspended. He wrote the usual "I was young and dumb and in over my head" sob story and got put on probation for a semester, so he had a repeat of the fall. At the end of the year, he was kicked out and didn't care. He made something on the order of $150K in return for about $8K in student loans to cover a year of housing and tuition. So far as I know, he was never caught. It may have been a short-sighted maneuver in the long run, but in the short run it seemed fairly genius to effectively use federal loans to start your dog business. Not a police officer, but I once dealt with a criminal who forged court documents facilitating his own release from prison. Some fella broke into a jewelry store a couple of decades ago. You'd think he'd go for the vault, but instead he stole the chandelier overlooking the showroom. Turns out the thing is priceless. Funny thing is, we found the owner's daughter half naked in the store in the morning. She claimed she had night walks and we immediately suspected foul play. Unfortunately, the security camera footage for that night had been removed, so we couldn't verify her story. We let her go and tracked her as we thought she could lead us to the chandelier. Sometime later she made a trip to Mexico in the middle of nowhere. We thought she stashed the chandelier there, so we set up a raid with the Mexican police. On the day of her arrival, we raided her cottage only to find her sitting around in lingerie with no chandelier in sight. Trail went cold and we never caught the thief. But the chandelier's been reportedly sighted in the German black market. The perfect crime, whether it's by the girl or some probably very handsome, strong and authoritative individual who probably owns a thriving farm.